Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. So here we are in building a blog or building a simple blog series part 9. So in the previous tutorials we've been building on an authentication system. It's not perfect, it's not worthy of any production website, but it's a start to develop our knowledge of the authentication system. So as promised, I said that I would follow that tutorial up with some other smaller tutorials whereby we extend and look at how to improve upon it. So in this tutorial, we're going to extend the Django user model using a one-to-one link and then develop a user profile image system or facility or service or feature. That's probably a better word. So yeah, we're going to create a new model to store the user data. That's the first step. And then I'm going to introduce the idea of receivers to perform actions on events. And this is a really powerful tool because now we're really getting to a point where we can see that we can actually hook into what Django is doing in the background, and we can actually then extend upon that so that when Django performs an action, in this case, performs or creates a new user, we can override or we can add new features so that other actions are performed. So we're going to use a receiver here so that when we create a new user, it also creates a new profile for that user. Of course, once we've done building the model, we're going to then delve into the form and the view and save that new data. So we are working from the previous tutorial number 8, where we built the authentication system. There is a link so you can download that. There is a link to a video which shows you how to actually create or start that application. So look at that if you need it. Then the final step in this tutorial is that we're going to build a user profile image feature. So the user can upload an avatar image and we'll then apply that as their user profile image. So I've gone ahead and downloaded the previous tutorial code, part 8, and I've started the code. You can see that we can run it directly. And you should now be able to, for example, log in. So you can log in as, I think it's test and test. So let me just log out. Doesn't work. Log out. So test and test should sign you in. So at the moment, when we go over to the edit the details, we can see that all we have is first name, last name, and email. And obviously that information is coming from the user's model, the default information we have, or the default information we can save about the user. So we want to extend this now and add more items because no doubt you want to store more information about the user. So we created an accounts application. So we're going to use this application and go into the, which doesn't exist yet in actual fact, we're going to create a models file. So we'll create a new file here called models.py. So we're going to build a new model and extend from the user's model. So to start off, we're just going to import the Django models so that we can work with models and build models. And then we're going to import the authentication model, the users table, into this project. So I'm going to call my new model just profile, and I'm going to make a one-to-one connection between this table and the users table. So we do that and we use on delete cascade, which means that when we delete a user in the user table, it should also delete the user in this profile table. So let's add a new field for the user profile image. So I've just called this avatar. So here we're using the image field. Notice that I've included upload to attribute. So we're going to use the user directory path, and the default is going to be user avatar JPEG. So in a previous tutorial, if you remember, we created the media folder. So if you aren't working from this project, you're going to need to install Pillow. So here we're using Pillow 7.2.0. That's going to help you manage images. And then you're going to need to go to the settings. So in this project, the core is the default application. We've got settings, and at the end here, we have some settings here to the media root and media URL. So here we're using a folder called media to store our images, and we define, like I said, the media root and the media URL. So here I'm saying upload to, and I'm now going to create this method user directory path to define exactly where I'm going to store the data. So you can see that the default path is user avatar, so that if there's no image that's already been created for this user, if the user hasn't uploaded an image, then it's going to use the default. So there's always going to be an image available for the user to use. So I can go ahead and create a new method here and connect it to this user directory path, where I'm going to create a custom path to store my image data, or to store the user's avatar images. So I'll go ahead and build this. So it was called user directory path. So I bring in the instance and the file name into this, and then I'm going to return the actual path. So it's going to be stored inside the media folder in a folder called users, and then avatars. And I've got these other attributes 0 and 1. So I then define that format. So the first of all, 0 is going to represent the instance user. So the instance, this instance, the user, and then obviously this is a one-to-one connection. So I can then go into the user model and access the ID, and then the file name. So I'm going to store an image that the user uploads to the media folder, users folder, avatars folder, then a custom folder based upon the user ID, and then the file name. So that's how the images are being stored. So let's just finish off by adding another field here. You can obviously add as many as you like. So I'm going to add a bio field here where someone can type in details about themselves. So let's go ahead and just access the admin. Let's just register our model so it's accessible within the admin area. So now we should be able to go into the admin area and access our model. So back in our application, I'll just go to admin. You can now see we have the accounts profiles model, and inside of here we're now receiving an error. So no such table accounts profile. So let's just go back into the code and work out what the problem is. It's very simple. The actual model doesn't exist yet. So there was a pause there. I was hoping you were going to try and work it out, honestly. So the problem is obviously that we've created a model, but we've actually yet to apply it to our database. So we can now go ahead, if I just close the server, we can now go ahead and make the migrations. So first we make migrations as per normal. I can spell it right. And then you can see it's going to create a new model called profile. So now we can go ahead and migrate. So at this point, you may receive an error because I've kept on purpose in this series the data to a minimum, and I've tried not to build this up. Of course, you may have utilized some of the previous code to build something, and you could start to receive some errors here because we're dealing with the fundamentals of your tables here in your databases. Obviously, there's dependencies between different tables. So here, there could be problems for you. It may be that you're going to have to kind of export your data, completely rebuild your database, and then import the data back in. For me, you can see that it works absolutely fine. So now we can go ahead back in the administration. We can now go to accounts and profiles. Of course, we have no profiles available. Now, I just wanted to show you this. So if I go into the home, for example, go to users, let's just create a new user. So what we would probably want to happen is that once we save a new user, we would want to have a profile set up for them automatically. So if I go back to home and profiles, you can see that we don't have a profile available. So what we're going to do next is utilize a receiver, signals in Django, which is going to essentially, when we create a new user, it's going to capture that signal, the fact that someone is trying to build or create a new user. Then it's going to automatically create a profile entry in our profiles table that corresponds to that user. So it's worth definitely reading through the signals in the documentation. It takes you through all the different steps to build signals or receivers so that we can perform actions when Django does something in the background. Okay, so when an event occurs in the background. So receiver functions. So first of all, we need to define a receiver function. So first of all, let's just make sure that we've got all the right dependencies for this. So we need to import from the Django.dispatch the receiver. So that's the first step. So now let's go ahead and build our receiver. So let's go ahead and build our receiver. So there's two properties here. First of all, we have post save. So the manual tells us it's like pre-save, but sent at the end of the save method. And then secondly, we define the sender, which is essentially the model. So here we're using sender equals user. So essentially this receiver is waiting for the users or new users to be saved. When a new user is saved, a signal is sent across to this method that we're going to build, and then it will perform the action that we have in the method. So we go ahead and create our new method here, and then we pass in some attributes here. So we've got the sender, which is the user, and then we've got the instance, and then created. So back in the documentation here, you can see that we got the sender, the model class, the instance, the actual instance being saved, and created, a Boolean true if a new record was created. So at this point, this is important, created, because this is a Boolean. So essentially what's going to happen here, we're now going to check to see if created equals true. Because if we make a new user, this created here will be flagged as true. It's a Boolean true. So we can check that, and then if it is true, we can then perform an action. So we create if created. So if it equals true, we're then going to go ahead and profile objects, which is obviously our model here. And then we're going to create a new user instance. So we just say user equals instance. So we just create a default instance or blank instance of, we'll create a blank instance entry into our profile table for the new user. Okay, so I apologize if that was too much information or not enough information. Hopefully by linking and showing the documentation, you can read through that, and it is fairly self-explanatory of what we're doing here when you read through that. But just have the overview and underpinning idea of what's happening here. Like I said, when we save some data in the user table, that we're going to have a flag that's true. We're going to check to see if the flag is true, if something has been created. If something has been created, we're just going to create a blank instance, a new entry in our profile table for the new user. So we're not actually building a new model, so we don't need to migrate or make migrations, etc. So let's just go ahead and see what happens when we actually have this in place. So if I just go back to the project here, I'm just going to log out and attempt to log back in again. I need to start the system. So if I try to log in as test, we're okay. Edit details, we're okay. So let's go ahead now and go into the admin area. Like we did before, we're going to build a new user. So I'll just delete this user. And we build a new user, and they should now have an instance, whereas before they didn't, in the profile table. So I add a new user. Okay, and then press save. So a new user was created. So now when I go into the profiles, you can see that we have a new user in there. So at the moment, obviously it just says profile object 1. Of course, we can change that very quickly by going into our model. So using our classic dunder here, so we're just going to return the user And I'm going to drill down into the user table, which we can't see, and then access the username. So I'm going to just apply that and go back and press refresh. Yep, so we can now see which profile it refers to. So I'll go into here and we can see we've got a blank entry here. You can see that the avatar is using currently the user avatar JPEG, which was the default item that we created. So the user avatar JPEG, so that's all working absolutely fine. So for those who haven't been following this series, we've been building, or the previous tutorial, we built this system here. So I'm logged in as test. You can see that when we go to the edit details, we've got this here. So let's go into the code and just access that. So we're inside the accounts forms. At the bottom here is a little bit of a mismatch of code here in actual fact, because I was explaining different things. So you can see that I've got the first name, last name, and email defined, and we're setting out attributes, and we're doing things in different ways here. So that's currently the code for that particular form. So what we want to do here is not necessarily utilize this form, but we're going to use a form within a form. So let's go ahead and define a new form for this data. So we go ahead and create a new class. I'm going to call this user profile form. We're just extending from model form. So we're just going to have Django build our form for us. So we're going to use the model profile and then the fields bio and avatar. So we go ahead and I'm just going to create a widget here. So we're just going to add some style here because we're using Bootstrap. So the bio we're going to have a text area. That's going to be a text area. And then we're just going to have 5 rows and use the form control class from Bootstrap. So that's in place. Of course, I'm using this new model, so I'm going to need to import that model in. So from accounts, cancel that. From accounts.model, we're going to import the profile model. So let's now move across to the view and see what was happening in the view. So we had, it was password protected. So we had edit here. So at the moment we receive the request method post, and then we deal with the form. So the form is the user edit form. So that was the form that you currently see. And you can see here we checked if it's valid, then save the data. Else we just showed the form. So that's what's happening at the moment. So we're going to put the form inside of the form, and we're going to save the user form and the profile form at the same time. So let's go ahead first and import the model. I don't think I've done that yet. So we've imported the model profile to make it available. And now we're going to go ahead and just extend this. So let's start off by importing the actual form and then just making sure that the model is available. And then we can go down and create a new entry here. So the profile form equals user profile form. And obviously when someone submits via post, we want to capture the information. So we're going to get the post information for this. And also in this case, they're posting files. So we want to also capture that. So in this case, we now want to validate whether both forms are valid. So instead of if user form is valid, we can just extend. So we can say if profile form is valid and user form is valid. And then we can go ahead and save both the user form, and then we can also save the profile form. So we save the data in the corresponding databases. So in addition to that, obviously we want to output not only the user form now, but we also want to output the profile form. So we go ahead and do that. I'll just tap that in. So we can now output the form if we don't receive a post request. The user would just see the form. So we then return. So let's just move this across. So we then return, and then obviously we want to also now return the profile form as well as the user form. So we can just extend that with a comma and then add in the profile form, which obviously correlates to this entry here. So now that we have that in place, we can then go ahead to our template. So you'll find the template in the templates, and then it'll be in accounts. and then we've got the update.html page. So again, a load more code that we pre-written in the other tutorial. So down here you can see we've got our CSRF token, and we're using labels and we're extracting the information out individually from the form and placing it on the page just to add some more styling. So what we're going to do before we save the changes, we're going to add a new entry just below the email form where we're going to add the bio and the option to allow the user to update or to upload a user image. So let's go ahead and first of all add a label. So we're just extracting the label from profile from bio label. So we get the label for the bio, and then we output the actual input or the text area. In this case, remember we defined the text area in the form. And now we add a new div element here with form group. So because we're just following the Bootstrap pattern here, we add a label for our avatar, and then the profile form avatar, which is going to show the button that allows us then to upload a file. So it's as simple as that. So now we can go ahead, hopefully, and have a look and refresh. And we've got an error, user has no profile. So we were expecting this problem because we're currently logged in as someone who the user was created before we created the profile system. So they don't have a profile. So let's go to admin, and remember we're currently signed in as test. So if we go to profiles, well, we don't have a profile. So if you are utilizing this code, you're going to need to potentially recreate some users in order to get this code working. So we could potentially add a new profile. So I just select test and add new bio information and then press save. So we can save it like that. So let's go back into the area, into the edit details, and you can now see we have the bio, which I've just written, new bio, and we have the option here. So we're currently using the default, which is the avatar JPEG, which doesn't exist just yet. And we have the option now of uploading a file. So go ahead and select a file. So I've chosen a file. It's called untitled1jpg, and I'm going to press save. And you can see that I'm now being asked to fill this in. This is just because we need to get rid of the required in these sections here. So I press save, and I didn't receive a message saying it was successful. So potentially there is an error here. So because this is a user that we created beforehand, there's just a few things that maybe we want to change here. So let's just go back into the form area. At the bottom here, I was explaining in a previous tutorial about this clean email. I'm just going to get rid of that because logically it doesn't really make sense that we're trying to evaluate every single time whether the email is unique or not. So I'm just going to remove that from there and then go back in just to do a refresh here, and you notice that it refreshes what I previously done. Now it says details successfully updated. So let me just show you again, test. I'm going to choose a file. So I choose the same file as before, press save. Now it says details successfully updated. So let's go back into the admin area, and we should now see this new information. So you can see that I'm using this file that I uploaded. Now this is one of the things that I haven't implemented here, the fact that we can upload multiple images. So notice that when you upload an image, it uploads it with the file type or the file name that the file is given. But if we upload the same file again, Django will put on a random string there at the end of the file. Now what we want to do really is create a function so that we delete the previous file and use the new one. So that's something you can develop. So we can see that it's working. So let's just check the folder to see where the image is going. So if we go back into the code, we can now see if we go into the media file folder, we should be using the users, avatars, and then 17 is the ID of the user. So that uniquely identifies the user. The user is ID number 17. So that's the case. And now we've got two images, and notice that we're using this image at the moment. So next up, we want to replace the existing bio image here, which is just some CSS in a circle. We want to replace that with the image that we're using. So if you remember in the previous tutorials, we created a drop-down list here by utilizing in settings. So if you go over to the core and settings, we created a new view and we made it available within the whole project by placing it within the templates here. So this view is available, accessible on every page. So we're going to do the same thing again, but utilizing the avatar there. So we're going to make the avatar available on that navigation bar, which is obviously placed on every single page. So let's go ahead and access our views. So up the top here, we're going to create a new view for this. So I'm going to protect this view. So the user has to be logged in for this view to be accessible. So I'm just going to call this avatar. And then I'm basically, first of all, going to get the user ID. And then I'm going to use that user ID to select the avatar from the profiles table, user equals user. And then I'm going to create a context. So this is the data I want to send back. So the data that's inside the avatar there. So I return that as context. So now I can go ahead and go into the settings. And I just want to add a new entry right here. So let's just type that in. So that's going to be accounts.views.avatar. So that's the view that we just created called avatar. So now we just need to replace the image. So the good thing is I created the CSS beforehand, so it will be placed in a circle. So let's go ahead and find first of all the template, and it's in the base, and we're using the nav main. So at the moment you can see I've got this CSS here, it creates that dot, but we're going to utilize this to actually build the circular image. So this is where the dot is at the moment, so we can remove that, and now we can just add our image. So we're already in this section where the user has to be authenticated via this if statement here. So let's just go ahead anyway, and maybe we want to run this code only for users that are authenticated. So we first of all create the image tag, and obviously we're going to, inside the src, place some data. So here I'm just going to use some bad practice here. I'm just going to loop through the data and select the data. So for data in the avatar, I'm just going to extract the avatar as a URL. So I go ahead and do that. So obviously I don't need this here. So let's just get rid of that. So now we're looping through that data, and we're just extracting the avatar URL inside of the image. So let's go back to our page and refresh. And you can now see we've got this square image that we uploaded. This was the image that we've uploaded. So now we can go back and we can now just change the class up here from dot to avatar, and that's going to perform all the actions there and turn it back into a circle. So now we have an avatar. So the last thing I want to show you is just some of the settings that can be applied to this, because we're uploading or allowing users to upload files. This is always a tricky thing security wise, and we want to try and avoid allowing the users to do anything like this whenever we can, because it means a little bit more work for us. So this might be better linked to a third-party service, an image, rather than allowing people to upload files. Of course, we can manage it, but if you're building a small-scale website like this, potentially, it's just a bit potentially more code that you have to write. But we're just demonstrating some of the principles and features of Django. Let's not forget, this is not a production-level website at all. So let's go ahead and think about some of the validation checks that we can make. So we're going to make some validation checks inside the model in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the user has uploaded the right file of right size of image. So we're going to create some validation errors or some validation errors. So we're going to first import the validation error. So we can build some validation rules, and then we're going to build a new function here. So inside or just below our model, let's create a new method here. We're going to call that clean. So first up, I create a simple if statement here. So if not, obviously, if there is no avatar, then we're just going to raise an error. So that's the first thing that we can do. But importantly, when we want someone to upload an image, we want to define or try and limit what the user can upload. And if you think about user image sizes, we don't want the user uploading a 4K image just for a profile picture. So we want to limit them, and we want to define how the image should be sized before the user uploads. So we're going to first of all go in and add a new dependency here. So we're going to include the get image dimensions, because what we're going to do is when the user uploads the image, we're going to check the size. If the size doesn't match what we expect it to be, then we're going to raise an error and tell the user that they need to change that image to a certain size before they upload it. So let's just go ahead and do that. So next of all, we want the else. So if and then else. So let's start off by getting the width and the height of the image that the user has uploaded. We then go ahead and create an if statement. So if, for example, the width is not 200 pixels wide, then we're going to raise an error. And then we'll do the same thing again on the height. Obviously, you can change the parameters here. So if the height is not 200, then we're going to raise an error. So that should be it for now. So let's go ahead and test this. I'll just quickly change these numbers because my image is 200 by 200. So I changed it to 100 by 100. I'm going to try and upload a 200 by 200 image. So if we go ahead and test that out, at the moment it's saying that the details successfully updated, which is obviously incorrect. So there's a few changes. If you go into the accounts template, accounts folder template, and then update, you'll see in here that at the moment we're trying to validate the form. If the form is validated, we're doing something here, details successfully updated. But we want to update this now, because not only do we want the user form to be valid, we also want the profile form to be valid. So we'll go ahead and do that. So now we're testing both the user and the profile form is valid before we return details successfully updated. And while we're here, let's just add in an error for if the profile form returns an error. We're just going to say file size incorrect has to be 100 by 100. So here we're just blanketing the error. We're not going to use the error that we've generated in the model. So we'll try this again. We'll create a file or choose a file. So I know this file is way too big, so I press save changes. And now it says file size incorrect has to be 100 by 100. So you can see that the validation error is working, and we returned the error here so that we have to actually upload a 100 by 100 image. So let's just go back into just close this. Let's just go back into the models, and I'm just going to change the 100 to 200 because I know I have an image here that's 200 pixels by 200 pixels. So I go ahead and choose a file called untitled1, which is 200 by 200, press save, and you can see that we still receive an error. Now the reason why that was because I didn't press save. So I press save and I've tried again, and now we can see it says details successfully updated. In addition to that, you can now see that the profile image has also been updated to the image. Okay, so there we have it, extending the Django user model using a one-to-one link. And we developed a user profile image or avatar. And we obviously did some form validation or some checking of the image. So there's obviously lots more that you can do here to validate. We could check, for example, the file type that the user uploads. Obviously, for security reasons, obviously users can upload a JPEG but include different code. So there's obviously different security issues here, like I think I alluded to. But overall, this is a baseline, an idea, a way of performing this function. So we created a new model to store the user data, and we used receivers to perform actions on events. That's a really powerful tool that definitely look into and have a read. We developed the form and view to save a new data. So we looked at the different parameters there. And of course, we created a new profile image feature, and we added some validation to ensure that the image size was what we wanted before the user uploads it to the system. So again, thank you for listening. Hopefully you got to the end. If you have, thank you very much. And I'll see you in the next tutorial.